Now, transfer deadline day is on Tuesday. The window slams shut at 11 o'clock. We now know that we've missed out on Messi, and it looks like we'll miss out on Ronaldo as well. But there have been a couple of additions. Obviously, Lianco has linked up with the team this week. And as you mentioned, Glenn, we've had all the classic posting pictures of Ocean Village on his Instagram.
Yeah.
It's good business for the Harbour Hotel when we sign a new player. But also this week, the sought-after teenager Thierry Small has completed his move to St Mary's from Everton. Now, this is the 17-year-old left-back who signed a 3-year contract with the club. We know that he's a product of the Everton Academy, and he's going to be, or is considered, one of the most promising young fullbacks in the country. He's also spent a bit of time as a central defender and a left winger, which I think will be quite handy. And Dan, you wrote a piece about some of the younger signings and why they're choosing Southampton this week, which was a really interesting read on The Athletic. Do you just want to tell us about the headlines around that?
Yeah, so it was just earlier this year. I was led to believe there was a kind of a senior leadership meeting, and obviously Southampton know as a club they're not going to be able to financially compete with some of their closest rivals. So it's okay, well, how do we try and be smart? What should we be looking at where perhaps other clubs aren't looking at so aggressively? And I think you kind of have, by coincidence more than anything, Matt Crocker and his wealth of knowledge of kind of English players from being at the FA and in charge of the development teams there. He's got an incredible knowledge. And then Martin Glover, head of scouting and recruitment, that's got an incredible contacts book by all means, and knows most of the clubs inside out, and especially Everton, where they got him from. So he already knew Thierry Small, would have already had a relationship. And just going back to that meeting, it was decided, well, why don't we kind of market us? Like, look at all the players going to Germany. And it was kind of like, well, why don't we market ourselves as that? Well, don't go there. Come here instead, and you'll play in the Premier League, and it saves you moving abroad as a youngster and whatever. And yeah, that led to them going after Livramento, Small, and I don't think it's going to stop. I think that's going to be something that we see continuing, and it's a smart strategy. It's a smart strategy if they win. In like kind of staying up this year is really, really important. And I think based on the first 3 games, I think we've probably seen enough to think that there are definitely going to be 3 worse teams than Southampton, and they actually look, when they do play well, they look very good, Southampton. So I think they're going to be fine. And then it's you get that year, they have that year experience, and then you really kick on the following year. And I know people on Twitter are like, oh yeah, but we're only going to sell them, but that's besides the point. It's kind of, that's what Southampton do. I mean, if they sell Livramento back to Chelsea, they're going to make a fortune. And then you go and buy either another really young one or go and get a ready-made one. It's that to me is kind of a bit of a kind of old argument now. But no, I quite like the way they've recruited. I think it makes sense to go after the best youngsters. And look at Livramento. How many teams do you reckon are looking at him now thinking, oh, why weren't we aware of that one? Or why couldn't we have done more to get him? I know of one big club that were already asking Southampton how they managed to do that deal. So clubs have certainly started taking notice of what Southampton are doing, and they've done it very well this summer.
And Steve, do you think it's about just accepting the process? And do you think we are accepting that a bit more now as fans? We know that we've signed someone like Lianco, and we're expecting them to be sold on for 40, 50, 60 million.
I wouldn't have used him as the example.
In a few years' time. I'm being really positive about him. I think that's an absolute bargain. But are we more accepting of that now? And we're waiting for these players to move on in a couple of years. And we trust the process, and we know that there are going to be some exciting new youngsters. We're not talking about Ryan Bertrand anymore, are we? Because of the people we brought in. So it seems like we're a bit more accepting of that.
I think certainly the club is more accepting of it. They've obviously come up with this strategy, and they've gone sort of full pelters behind it this summer. In terms of the fan base, I think there's still an element of the fan base that seems to have this idea that we should be genuinely competing with clubs who are throwing silly money around. But I mean, I don't think that's especially realistic. But unfortunately, that is there is a proportion of the fan base that does genuinely believe that. I think most of us are realistic enough to know vaguely our position in the food chain, and that as a result kind of limits where you can realistically go. I think ultimately any team that kind of punches above its weight for a period of time, as we did for probably a good 3, 4, 5 years maybe. Ultimately, there comes a time where the bigger clubs look at you and think, well, how are they doing this? And let's take some of their expertise and talent from them, because we can pay them double the money, and hopefully their performances in a more talented squad will still be good, and maybe we could even make them even better. But that's kind of
is that Cedric at Arsenal you're talking about?
Oh, that's gone swimmingly, isn't it? I mean, he had a stormer on Saturday.
That was another one of your tweets that I liked from yesterday. There was you and Piers Morgan between you. It was quite an interesting Saturday afternoon on Twitter.
Oh, I love Arsenal.
That's not an argument you want to be on the same side of, is it?
But just going back to the recruitment thing, because obviously where I've written about it this week, I kind of feel quite passionate about it just this week. And I think, look, the people, I'm sure the guys at Southampton would love to be able to go and spend 30. It all just stems from ownership. If Southampton had an owner who was investing, yes, of course, they'd be going up while still going after some of the talented kids, because that kind of is the Southampton way or whatever they call it. They would be going and signing, 25, 30 million pound players, but they can't. So what do? You have to make the best out of that. And what's that saying about when you get given a lemon, you make lemonade or something? And that's what they're trying to do. I don't think it's so much trusting the process. I think you have to trust people. The process, it's not a new process to Southampton. Pretty much every club outside the kind of top teams in Europe and in the Premier League, they're feeder clubs. That's just where they are in the pecking order. Leicester would be seen as the next best club. They sold their defender to Man United. So it's kind of just everyone in the Premier League has their place in the pecking order, and you trust the people rather than the process. I think if Matt Crocker continues to impart his knowledge, if Martin Glover can still get his team spotting the youngsters, and if you've got Martin Simmons, if he can complete the deals, then that's what you should be looking at rather than the process. I think it's the people that are leading the process that should be given more of the spotlight into whether it's successful or not.
I think they have to be given a lot of credit as well, because this has kind of ticked all the boxes. The ones you've talked about there about recruiting players and improving them and selling them on maybe later on. But also it's solved the short-term problem. If you remember last year, our problem wasn't the first 11. It was what was behind the first 11.
Exactly.
Now, you talk about Thierry Small. Last year, we had Ryan Bertrand, and when he got injured or was out of form, we were crowbarring some other player who'd never played at left back before.
Probably.
Yeah, we had ridiculous. We had no options. So we've got this Thierry Small guy. He's kind of. I mean, in your piece, I thought there was an interesting bit about it's almost like admitting the failures of the academy. Well, I agree with that to a point. We didn't have a backup left back last year because the one we had, Jake Vokins, was deemed to be not good enough, so he was put out on loan. We've got a guy now, Thierry Small, who I assume if Walker-Peters or Perot, if they were both injured, Thierry Small could play. I know he's only 17, but from the limited sort of footage I've seen of him, he looks light years of what we had ahead of what we had as a backup last season.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I think one of the arguments I've kind of seen is, we're replacing them with kids. I don't think you can have it both ways. I don't think you can go from complaining that we haven't got enough players to, we have got enough players now, but they're not, they're kids, they're teenagers. I personally don't think you can have it. If Southampton could go out and sign 2 left backs for 15 million quid each, of course they do it, but they can't. So that's why they go and get Thierry Small. Yeah. And the fact that hopefully he's going to turn out to be a very good player. But I think if we're talking about the recruitment in general, I actually think, speaking to agents and people at different clubs and all of that, it's been such a kind of weird market this summer where all the teams in Europe, I mean, apart from Real Madrid, who have just magicked up some money from nowhere to try and sign Mbappe, haven't got much money. And look, there are so many teams in the Premier League that I hear about that are trying to sell players, trying to get rid of the dead wood, that can't do it. But Southampton have actually managed to do that this summer, which, because of all the signings they're making, is actually being forgotten about. Look at some of the players that have left now.
Oh, absolutely.
And you think, God, how good is it that they're out the door? They're not having to pay their wages for this season. They're gone, and they're gone on permanent deals. I think because it kind of happened early on, that for me is almost one of the highlights. Is that, well, actually somehow they've managed to get rid of these players and find buyers. That in itself is quite impressive.
So, would you say it's been a good window, all in all, Glenn?
Yeah. I mean, I've just written a bit actually for for the BBC website, which looked at the transfer window as a whole. And, it's not until you write all the names down and the names of the departed, we've shifted out some big earners, as Dan said. We've also shifted out some players who have come through the academy, but they're never going to be good enough to play in the Premier League. And it's important to move those players on as well, A, to give them, more regular football at a lower level, and B, so they don't block the pathway through of some of the 17, 18-year-olds who may at some point be good enough. So we've done some really good work in players leaving, as Dan said, and so far the players that have come in, I like the strategy. Obviously, Livramento looks top class, and Thierry Small, we hope he turns out to be the same. So overall, I'm pretty happy with it. I would have preferred, the central defender is a key one. See how he works out. I think when we kind of thought that we knew that Vestergaard was going to be leaving, I was looking at the sort of Joachim Andersen, who's gone to Crystal Palace. I thought he would have been an ideal replacement, but that was 18, 19 million quid.
Yeah.
So we've gone for a cheaper option there. And we've just got to, trust the people, trust the scouting, and hopefully Lianco works out to be what we need. But that one's a bit unknown. But overall, I think the transfer window's gone very well.
Well, here's what manager Ralph Hasenhüttl had to say.
Not 100% finished. We'll have a look. If there's such an interesting opportunity popping up, then maybe we do again. But I think the transfer window so far was a successful one for us, I must say, and it was needed definitely. And yes, we changed the team a little bit, and quite enjoy working with the team so far. The only position where we don't have that many opportunities is the 6. We have with Ward-Prowse and Ibra 3 players there for 2 positions. Every other position is doubled. We have a few players that can also play the 6, but when we would do something, then maybe on this position again.
Anything else you think we need, Steve? What would make it perfect for you?
No, I think that's probably about it, to be honest. I think we've covered a lot of bases. We've now got a lot of variety up front, creative options if they're on form, which we obviously saw yesterday. Some of the previously fringe players have kind of stuck their hand up and said, "Yeah, I actually fancy a bit of this now." Other than that, I don't think there's a position where we're necessarily lacking now. As Glenn said, we wait and see what happens with Lianco to see whether he's not just an Instagram sensation but actually a half decent central defender. But yeah, other than that, I think we're reasonably well covered. Certainly we've probably had a better window than a lot of the sides we're likely to be competing with this season.
And just as an aside, Dan, as a football journalist, what does transfer deadline day look like for you? Are you checking Twitter every couple of minutes? Are you on your laptop until 11 o'clock? Are you by the phone? You can't go anywhere?
No, yeah. I mean, I don't tend to get my sort of Southampton news from Twitter. You try and find it out yourself. So you're always just talking to contacts, making phone calls, sending messages, trying to find out that, people within the club or very closely connected to the club that have a good understanding of how they operate and who they're targeting. You're just kind of doing that all the time. And I mean, I think it's really interesting how what they do, because they're in a good place now where I kind of feel like anything else is a bonus. If you get an extra one in, it's a bonus. And I can't quite work out whether, would I like to see another number 10 come in? But then they've got so many of them. But then I just think they all do the same thing. So, and then I'd think, because if they end up with Minamino, then I wouldn't be happy with that. And look, I don't think they've got Minamino. And then you're thinking, central midfield, that's probably the only position where you haven't got 2 players for every. Because Ralph wants 2 players for every position, and in central midfielders, you've only got 3. But then, as I put in that piece earlier in the week, you've then got Matt Crocker saying, his job in the whole kind of club is to look at the pathway. And that's where Southampton have a problem. If they go and buy a number 6, it could, or get one on loan, it could create so many problems. You're then saying to Ryan Finnegan, who you speak to people within the club, they do generally rave about him. They think of all the academy players kind of coming through at the moment, he's the one that stands out the most. So if you then go and buy one, what are you saying to him about his chances? That's why Livramento's left Chelsea, why Small's left Everton, because they've not seen, Chelsea go out and spend £50 million on a right back if they need a new one. I know they've got Reece James and he's from the academy, but that's not the point I'm making. And then if you go and get another one and they're better than Diallo, what chance does that give him? It's a really kind of weird, nuanced position they're in at the moment with that number 6. But Southampton love doing deadline day deals recently, don't they? So I imagine it will be like one where you hope it will be quiet, but it will end up being really busy. I think who have they signed on deadline day recently? Walcott, wasn't it? It was Walcott?
Yeah.
Ings. Was Walker-Peters? Well, I don't think he was deadline day, but he was late on, wasn't he, Walker-Peters?
But the Walker-Peters deal was basically done 3 months previous.
Yeah, but I feel like there's more. Minamino, obviously the most recent one, Minamino.
Kevin Danzo.
So, they've got a history of doing deadline day deals, and they have still got that loan option. So
yes, there's one left, isn't there?
There's one left, yeah.
One loan option left.
And I just think, I don't know, I just can't see a world where they don't use it, but then maybe I'm living in a different world to them.
Speaking of loans, I see Brandon Williams had a stellar debut.
He was
for
awful.
Norwich. Yeah,
he was awful.
I think we dodged a bullet there, didn't we?
Yeah, solid bullet dodged.
Well, let's hope it's a busy-ish day on Tuesday.